The image has always been important because it's one where an enormously famous artist made a direct political intervention with a piece of work. Then when I went to see Guernica in Madrid, which I did when this project was almost finished, the size and scale of that political statement is overwhelming. In some respects, it was always an inspiration, isn't actually too much of an exaggeration as a work. So there's the thought about somebody who was producing art was moved to create a huge canvas, isn't really the right word because it's actually on wood, but a huge piece that tried to document suffering. And actually that's a really, really difficult task for artists, photographers, any maker, to even try to visualise suffering. So the work was really important to me as an art historian, and I knew about it, but it was that isn't, and gesture's not the right word either, but it was that intervention that Picasso made. The painting has never gone away, never really left the political arena, never left people's consciousness. It's extraordinary. So the amount of times you might see the shapes have become really familiar. And then at the moment, and I think we started the project in 2012, at that particular moment, what it seemed to me was that there was a war in Afghanistan, and that had generated an incredible Islamophobic backlash in Britain as in other European countries. And that Islamophobic backlash had actually transformed itself into a new fascist movement. So Guernica seemed ever so relevant because it was about war, about bombing of civilian populations, and about the way in which fascism is bound up with imperial war, military campaigns of that particular type. So there seemed to be some very strong message or echo in the image that had motivated me and others to begin the process of remaking.
Guernica is a work of art which is really emotive. People have a strong reaction to it when they see it. And so through this kind of collective way of making, we kind of experienced lots of people's responses to it. So both in terms of our own group of collective makers, but also in terms of the public sewings, and actually taking the banner into different public settings and inviting and encouraging people to come and join in was actually incredibly moving at times in terms of the stories that came through. People's anxieties around stitching itself was something that came through as well in the public sewings.
The first public sewing I seem to recall was in the Jubilee Library in Brighton, and it felt extraordinary. It made me feel very elated because so many people came up to join in, people who'd never sewn before and wanted to do it because of their sewing skill, trying something out. Other people who'd sewn many times and wanted to explore what we were doing. But mostly people were coming up, and once they heard what we were talking about, and some took the leaflet away, but people wanted very much to be part of it, and you could see that people who were coming up and joining in felt really pleased to be part of it, and they were able to talk about what they feared and about racism and the worries they have in that sort of way. There were people from many countries who joined in, which was also rather an enriching part of it too.
When I was in Manchester, there was an amazing public sewing at the Working Class Movement Library, which coincided with Ed Hall, the great banner maker, the TUC banner maker, came to our public sewing in Salford the next day, which was amazing for me to sit and listen to what he had to say about the importance of banner making to raise people's spirits and to enable people to feel that they had a voice that was visual for their message. People's memories were prompted by the process of sewing. Here in this gallery, in the Pallant Gallery, we had people who spoke about walking the route along the top of the Pyrenees and gazing down at the sites of the great battles that were carried out there, fought by the Republican fighters during the war against Franco, the resistance against Franco. We also had women and men who spoke about their times during the Blitz when they were evacuated. And one woman in Brighton who spoke to us told us she'd never seen her family again, which was incredible. She'd been in Sussex all that time and there was no family for her to go back to.
This installation's been up for just over a week, and today what we organised was donations to go to the Calais region, to Dunkirk. So members of the university were invited to donate money. We raised quite a lot of money, sleeping bags, tents, food, toiletries, toothbrushes, toothpaste, men's jackets, kids' clothing. So we collected them up here and then they were bundled into a van and they'll be in Dunkirk by about midday tomorrow. The informal camps, so the ones that aren't run by any NGOs, they lack very, very basic amenities. They don't lack everything, but they do. There are very specific things that they need and they run out of. At the moment it's warm clothing in particular, but also toiletries and food. So in some respects the banner was a gathering point for that donation, which I'm really pleased about. The Guernica banner in this space is juxtaposed with a tarpauling of the same dimensions that has the title I Was Not Born With a Document, which comes from Claire Lauvignac's photos in the Calais jungles. And so one of the stories of the banner which we started out with way back in 2012 was around the ways in which war impacts upon communities, and including those who migrate because of that, who seek refuge. And so with the Banner Project, what's really interesting is it already involved Migrant English Project and Brighton Voices in Exile. So some of the makers were activists working with refugee communities, asylum seekers and migrants. So the banner really in some ways holds the other works together, actually. It kind of brings together the idea of aerial bombardment and the flight for refuge. So if anything, it's a really important piece of work here because actually it's about the causes of a refugee crisis that we are currently in, or the refugee crisis. I know some people prefer the term humanitarian crisis, which I think is probably better in that respect. So what's really interesting is the banner is doing its work again in a different kind of space. A few days before its installation, it was carried on a demonstration called Open Europe, Open the Borders. So it has a tiny rip, if you can see on the left-hand corner, which we will need to mend, but that was caused by the weight of the banner in the rain. It got heavy and I think it pulled against and pulled the stitches. Didn't have time to mend it, but in fact that rip's part of the story now and the mend will be part of the story too.